Hello, everyone. Welcome back to AI Showbiz Summit 4.0. It is with great excitement and my extreme pleasure to welcome to the virtual stage Amit Pradhan, President of the Silicon Valley Blockchain Society. It is such an honor to know you, as I was saying, Amit, and I'm going to turn the virtual stage over to you. So take it away.
Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and I'll quickly share my screen and let and thank you for having me go right after the incredible Terry. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it looks magnificent. It looks great. We see it perfectly.
Great. It's quite something to go after this superstar astronaut. I won't take any time I won't spend any time on my background, but just very quickly, it's been 25 years of a combination of deep tech, venture investing, impact, and I wrap all of that into this umbrella of how do we create, influence, and invest in people and projects that can move humanity forward. And it's a very interesting time for this, right? Because we constantly say that no one could have predicted this. This came out of nowhere, except the alarm bells were already being rung, you see. Unless you've been living under a rock, the idea that a 16-year-old with Asperger's and an unflinching dedication to alerting, nay, actually demanding that the world pay attention to the climate crisis we've created for our host planet is rather astonishing, isn't it? And think what you may of her mission, her tone, her irreverence towards my generation and the one before. If it was hard to ignore her and the collective movement she triggered then, it sure is a lot harder now, isn't it? Buckminster Fuller would have been proud. We are called to be the architects of the future, not its victims, he said. An entire generation that we call entitled and addicted to their phones and obsessed more by the vanity of Instagram than the endorphins from a bike ride, yet seemed far more aware and alarmed by the existential risk at hand. And yet, so much of existing society, existing powers that be, especially here in the White House, for instance, tried just that, to ignore this collective global movement. America first, after all, build that wall, let the Chinese and the Indians deal with their smog-filled cities, stay the course, business as usual. Then COVID-19 showed up, a virus with origins in China and a generic name of a popular Mexican beer shut everything down. Business as usual, America first. In the words of Apple's autocorrect, wake the duck up. This is the Great Reset. And how we traverse out of it will determine our very existence going forward. I'm sure we all have some fabulous ideas for this path forward, but here's the thing. Even the best of ideas don't even get the privilege of dialogue because of the narrative they are contained in. So let me explain. This is not a political point, I promise. Who here remembers in a hashtag Hillary Clinton's or message from 2016? It's a trick question because there isn't an answer. But let me try. Trump is crazy and democracy is hard, but if we come together, we can protect the dreamers and save Obamacare. Probably all true, but in the 3-second attention span, what? And then who here remembers Donald Trump's core hashtag message for 2016? Boom, make America great again. What does that even mean? If you're a white supremacist, it means make America white again. If you're anti-trade, it meant kill NAFTA. And if you're anti-immigration, it meant build the wall. Narrative needs to be both incisive, but also inclusive. So the things we work on and discuss need to be relevant for Silicon Valley and Munich and London and Monaco, but also for my 70-year-old mother in India, the farmer in Rwanda, the laborer in Bangladesh, and yes, the Trump supporter in Kansas. So applying this to Corona, COVID-19, this shutdown was not one driven by market or economic forces. This was Earth, our landlady saying enough. Between the hedonistic parties, the debauchery, the ridiculously loud blaring music, the unruly guests, the damage and destruction to property, the needles and empty cans strewn all over, and incessant complaints from all of the neighbors, and some dead bodies along the way. You know, Weekend at Bernie's Planetary Edition, she had no choice but to give us a final warning. To this, the eviction is coming. So here we are on an approximately 4-month notice period, give or take. So we sit here brooding in our isolation. I know I am, in the realization of just how utterly fragile we all are, how fragile this economic system is that we rely on, a much vaunted model of capitalism built for zero tolerance. Even a month or two of economic shutdown left capitalism desperately sucking on the teats of much maligned government. For those of you who remember Andrew Yang, one of the, I don't know, 3 million people who ran for the Democratic presidential nomination here in the US, the one thing he became known for was a $1,000 universal basic income to be paid monthly to everyone. Just the thought of it brought howls of communism to many. And yet, a Republican administration led by a businessman issued a $1,200 payment to all taxpayers, botched as it might have been. Ironic, isn't it? So here we are in this precarious notice period. What does the post-notice world look like? Scenario one, we go back to normal. Production goes into overdrive to make up for this lost time. Manufacturing plants run 24/7 to catch up. Employees are offered multiple shifts per day to make up for lost wages. Tax incentives bring more investors to cruise lines and airlines and fossil fuel industries. And all those canceled work trips need to be taken in a shortened time frame. Car dealers drop massive incentives to move all that stacked up inventory. And even though you've enjoyed that time of not having to commute, not having to drive 2 hours a day, how can you resist that ridiculous once in a lifetime 15, 20,000 discount on the BMW or Porsche you've always dreamed of owning? And as Terry alluded to earlier, we will see an alarming surge towards a surveillance state. Expect a Patriot Act Part 2, but driven by big data and cognitive AI, and quite frankly, an assault on our privacy. In the name of far more effective coordination, anticipation of future spread of pandemics, contact tracing and tracking are already underway. Apple and Google are licking their data-hungry lips. But here's the thing, already in a majority of countries around the world, the things people say in the safety of their homes can lead to persecution, prosecution, and in some places, even execution. We hurtle towards more nationalism in our politics and turn towards religious ideologues for answers, prayer over research. The cycle repeats. You get the picture. We go back to normal. There won't be another warning, I'm afraid. It's that eviction notice. The truth, though, is that this reset gives us the biggest opportunity we've had to come out of this stronger together. The rise of the collective over the individual. Families are already spending more time together, albeit forced. We've never seen as many offers for free health related services online, yoga, meditation, in home workouts, you name it. If we can stop eating constantly, I speak for myself at least, the disadvantage of being home and having a fully stocked kitchen, there's a good chance many will come out of this isolation looking and feeling better than they did a few months ago. We've seen a massive drop in production and consumption. Well, aside from toilet paper, as it turns out. In New York, as an example, levels of carbon monoxide, which mainly come from car exhausts, have dropped nearly 50%. In cities in China and India, India, where my family is at, they're seeing the sky and stars for the first time in 15 years. And interspersed with fake stories about dolphins shopping at downtown malls in Milan and lions doing push ups in public parks in Moscow, just look around and you can see an emergence of nature all around us. So, what if we did a fundamental rethink of the most basic metric that we use to measure progress, the GDP, the gross domestic product, which is normally calculated as total consumption plus total government spending plus total spend on infrastructure plus net exports. And we added the idea of net physical activity, amount of time spent at home, amount of learning activities people are spending on, communitas, time we spend with friends and family, and our net carbon impact on this earth. If we use the same surveillance examples of proximity and contract tracing and the number of steps we've taken and other activity tracing to help generate those numbers instead of just keeping tabs on citizens, we could still have that 3.5% GDP growth that everyone aspires for without it being attributed only to production and consumption. Greta's movement had already inspired a gazillion% increase in individual activism. The climate crisis, the assault on women's rights, the fight for equality had already propelled impact and value-based investing to become the fastest growing investor category by number of investors. Perhaps investors will get used to the idea that not all returns are measurable only by old metrics. Smart investors will want to know the true health of companies they invest in. How much net time are the employees, partners, and vendors of the investments spending on being healthy, mind and body, with family and loved ones? And maybe even going a step further. So let's take an example of a bellwether US company like Lockheed Martin. If the CEO woke up one day and said, we need more women on the board. We need to make sure our supply chain in China is using the same employee policies as our employees in Chicago. And all of the lessons we've learned of not traveling and still being able to take these effective meetings means that we can reduce our carbon footprint by 80%. We would all look at it from an ESG impact perspective and say, wow, this is amazing. And yet, the company makes weapons of war that are partly responsible for the systemic problems that we have today. And so it introduces this new concept called deep impact, the idea that we think through the intended and unintended consequences of what we create, managed in a transparent community-involved governance model. And imagine, this is a crazy thought, but imagine if we elected leaders who not only believed in science, but championed it and governed with empathy and consciousness. What would that even look like? Oh, wait, turns out we already know. And then there's the whole conversation around UBI, universal basic income. Remember that fragile economy and the sucking on the teats of government? The challenges with UBI are many. Who gets taxed to pay for this? Neither a perceived contributor nor a receiver truly enjoy the power inequality this creates. But more importantly, calling it UBI suggests it's free, undeserved, maybe even welfare. So I've started calling it universal earned income instead. And the earning comes from actually monetizing securely on the blockchain, anonymously with permission, nearly $3 trillion in value that is hiding in plain sight in the value of our digital lives. Where combining a lot of cognitive AI with some unique IoT sensor work and the blockchain in a project called Rainfall to do just this. We wanted to bring theory to practice. And it's rainfall.one if anyone wants to go read up on it. But here's the point. Until we find a way to fill the messaging void with a more appealing, inclusive narrative, we lose even before we get to make our case. So let me make the case. The metaphor that this great reset represents is not just a fight to avoid eviction. Done right, it will make us its biggest financial beneficiaries. To give you another quick example, besides that 3 trillion UEI market, experts in the field of carbon energy transfer and storage, or more precisely in the 15 to 20% loss in green energy during transfer and storage, estimate that based on today's market, that 15% represents a $4 trillion opportunity. See, in the narrative world, these would all be considered impact investments, edge cases, except in the Great Reset, these are trillion-dollar edge cases. And let's not forget the most vulnerable in society today. I sit on the board of this incredible, one of the finest refugee agencies called the Norwegian Refugee Council. And these refugee kids in a camp outside of Congo are being provided for with Maslow's basic needs. But their biggest challenge today, and NRC's challenge with 10 million refugees, is identity. They don't have passports, they don't have ID cards. And if you create it as a centralized model again, they'll have the same challenges when they move on. This is where the blockchain and decentralized identity comes into play. It goes to prove that using technology and the opportunities we have ahead of us, we can solve for some of the biggest challenges. We can create a society that is, for the first time, for the people, of the people, by the people. Look, everyone in Silicon Valley, where I'm based, loves a nice unicorn. Startups that get to $1 billion in value. In the Great Reset, though, these vanity metrics are as important as a tweet from the current White House. Because remember, what made Silicon Valley great was not just the money or the weather or the memories of Steve. We celebrated failure and backed the audacity of creators to solve for the big problems, including those in the camps in Congo. Not yet another AI-powered tokenized Instagram filter platform. So from an investor's perspective, what should investors focus on? I like to think that we should build our focus around impact, privacy, new economic foundations like UBI and UEI, on technology platforms like AI and IoT and deep decentralization, and then focus on the verticals or the themes that are going to be important going forward: health, wealth, the future of work, energy. There's incredible opportunities coming our way. We have the same opportunity in the areas of this infectious disease with Corona. There's a lot of work to be done, but there's a lot of money to be made as well. Because we don't have the option to go back to status quo, to normal, because the world has changed. We are in our final notice period. And yet, I could not be more optimistic about our path forward. Carl Jung said, and I love this quote, people don't have ideas. Ideas have people. Our landlady sure has an idea. It now just needs us, its people, to keep the lease on this gorgeous house we're renting. So can we please not screw it up? Thank you.
Thank you. That was very good. Let's see if there's any questions.
Yes. Amit, that was incredible. I move over Martin Luther King. That was so incredibly moving. So as we're all dealing with this great reset, what advice do you have for the entrepreneur, that the ones out there that feel they should just get right back to work and no more social distancing, like let's just jumpstart the economy and forget about anything else, nothing more important than the economy?
Well, I think, and this is something that everyone will agree with, that health comes first. At the best of times, health comes first, right? I always tell entrepreneurs not to go into this vicious cycle of burning themselves out, like they somehow need to have a company ready and launched and sold in in 6 months, because remember, every overnight success in the valley is 10 years in the making, right? And so health comes first, and I think with that, health opportunities come first as well. Just within the realm of corona, of infectious disease, there's so many opportunities around detection and testing and vaccines and infrastructure and even public policy and communications. There's no rush, and we have such interesting work models. Entrepreneurs can stay physically distanced, socially connected, socially responsible, and still build incredible things and connect people. I mean, this is a great example. Look at the number of people connected together without anyone having to risk the health of each other and the community.
Great. What inspired you to update your talk to the Great Reset? I'm so glad that you did. In fact, I'm thinking we need to share this very widely out there, because it was a seminal talk. I thank you for going to so much trouble to prepare it. But what was the inspiration behind creating it?
When we chatted in Davos, some of my past talks intersected with some of these ideas. I had a talk around the world of Greta and the next generation and the role they play, and this eviction notice is about screaming us in the face. And for me, it's about being able to find ways to get that message that will resonate, that we can find the parallels. And if you think of it, if you buy into the idea that this wasn't a market set, we have an excitable.
Is that your family?
Oh, it's not me.
Oh, it's someone else. Sorry about that. I think they muted. Go ahead, Amit. Now we can hear you again.
And the idea that when you think of it from that perspective, here we are, we've spent all this time, isolated. We've found things that, have started to bring us joy. We're not all sitting and suffering. We are connecting deeper. We're spending family time. We're doing more of walking and exercising. And again, like I mentioned in my talk, when I chat with my mom and dad and they talk about seeing the stars for the first time, it's such a bizarre concept. You have not seen the stars of the sky for this long. How amazing is that? And my dad, I was talking to my dad the other day, and he said this feels like weather-wise 1974. And I'm like, look, you have another 2 weeks in which you can either continue feeling this way and find a responsible path out, or you can go back to the only way you knew. And again, Indians will wear masks outside, not because of COVID, but because you can't breathe the air anyways, right? And so a lot of this drove me to want to create a talk that, there's work around that in terms of actual projects, but the idea that, there's such incredible people working on amazing things. And if we can give some sort of inspiration and direction around, specific things we can do for a world post the Great Reset, then we have a chance, and we have not just a chance of survival, but incredible opportunity. And that's where we want to, direct ourselves.